Welcome in, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about an idea, a possibility that there is no perfect. So, for me, I have struggled with different types of perfectionism throughout my life. I know this can be very prevalent these days, so I thought to make this episode about that, just discussing some different ideas of how to remedy perfectionism, as well as how to maybe even rethink this word perfect from a dharmic perspective. So perfectionism is one of these things, and it comes in many different forms. So I obviously, I'm not going to be able to talk about all the different kinds of forms. But for me, perfectionism comes in a type of form that really is placing outside myself some kind of ideal that I'm not living up to in the moment, or I'm not able to live up to. And then, of course, pretty quickly after that, the self-judgment follows, the self-loathing sometimes. And what I've noticed is the procrastination, because it's really hard for me to then put effort into something I want to do, because I am, slowed down by my own self-judgment. Or sometimes what happens is the flip side, where then, maybe I go into kind of a hyper mode of trying to get it right, of trying to be, perfect at the activity or whatever I'm doing or the job. And what I've noticed, other than just this causing me a lot of pain, is actually it doesn't necessarily make that thing better. It doesn't necessarily make me better at something in the long term. Maybe in the short term, we could say like perfectionism helps us to get something done, or maybe it I don't know, looks right according to us. But over the long term, I haven't experienced this as very functional, as very workable, as very, sustainable. So instead of perfectionism, what I recommend and what I often am trying to employ in my life is really more process orientation. So some of you who listen to my content or watch my content a lot, you hear me talk about this. But for me, because I'm so dedicated to a life of more process orientation, and I'll say this real quick, not that I'm able to do that all the time, right? But that's my aim. That's my view, what I try. But because I'm so dedicated to it, I'm also developing always new ways to work with this kind of process orientation. Probably that first way, as a meditator, who I'm interested in cultivating my awareness. I'm interested in cultivating a sense of nowness. I'm interested in cultivating, qualities of compassion, equanimity, loving kindness. How do you say it? More clarity into truth or how things are, right? That's what interests me as a meditator, a Buddhist meditator. And I hope you can see through my languaging here, I'm not so interested in, how loving a person I'm being, or how compassionate of a person I'm being, or how much awareness do I have, And again, that might sound a little weird, especially some people might be, their ears might perk up. Wait, you're not interested in being a loving being? Not really. Because when I get stuck in, am I being loving enough or not? Yep, it gets stuck in that perfectionism. It takes me out of the process of practicing love. It takes me out of the process of, being curious about how to bring more warmth or love in my relationship to my emotions or thoughts, and also in my relationships with others, right? It immediately takes me into that judgment zone of, am I being loving enough or not, right? Which, to me, it automatically implies some kind of a lack, like that I'm not a loving person, or that I'm not capable of it and I need to do more. So that's another element of perfectionism. It's like this constant, thing that's a bit out of reach, and we can never quite get it, and we need to achieve it. And it's always more and more and more, better, 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 do, become this, become that. I've just seen that as really dysfunctional in my life, and I'm kind of sick of it. Am I out of the woods? No, not by any means. But what I'm sharing with you is what helps me to work with this habit, right, in its many different forms, is engaging a more process oriented way of being. So if I want to become more of a loving person, if I have that wish, which is a wonderful wish, by the way, I just want to put that out there. Doesn't mean we can't have the aspiration to become more of a loving person, the aspiration to become more compassionate, the aspiration to cultivate our natural awareness in meditation or whatever. Aspiration is wonderful. Actually, we need aspiration. It's just that once we have the aspiration, we want to use that aspiration to enter a process. If we use the aspiration to immediately start comparing, right? And then again, shifting ourselves into this, perfectionist idea, this ideal of what that means. Like I said, we're going to lose out in the process of how we're actually practicing love or actually practicing compassion. And I don't just mean in a very superficial way, right? So I have other videos on that, on how to develop more compassion, how to develop more loving kindness from a Buddhist perspective. But anyways, I'm just using them as examples here. I hope you can see that. So becoming more process oriented has a lot to do, as I started to say, with becoming more interested in now, becoming more interested in what's in front of me right now. This has been probably the single most helpful mindfulness tool for me, is to remember when I'm getting overwhelmed, when I'm starting to develop fear about something in the future or fear about something that happened in the past. I just simply remind myself, I try to remember, is that right now? Like, is that happening now? And, obviously the answer is no. But what is happening right now is fear. What is happening right now is some sort of unease or dis-ease that's causing me to get overwhelmed or to have some stress, or again, to create this or be beholden to this idea of what a perfect me or a perfect situation in my life looks like, right? And so I come back to the process of just being here. I try to come back to the process of just being here and now with what's arising. And sometimes the emotion is really difficult for us to work with. I have some other content on that, guided meditations on handshake practice, coming from Sonia Rinpoche, or compassionate presence to feelings, or any kind of embodiment practices I often offer are really aimed at that. They're aimed at learning how to bear witness to our uncomfortable emotions and feelings, and how to inhabit and work with the feeling world more skillfully. So you can go check those out if you want, as a side note. But if that's not our starting place, if we don't have an active practice of that, and it's really difficult to bear witness to our fear because we tend to feed it and get overwhelmed by it when we feel it, then we need to start with something more simple, like how the air in the room is hitting our skin, how the temperature is hitting our skin, the sounds around us, the smells, what we see, maybe those in the room that are a little bit more comforting to us, a pet, a loved one, etc. So what we need to do is to start to relate to, how do you say it? What we need to do is to start to orient towards our environment and just be in the environment. As I said, I find embodiment practices really helpful for this. So for me, probably like initially when I'm reflecting on this, or remembering to bring myself back into the moment, or just relate with now, a lot of now exists, through my feeling world. So I'll just come into the feet. That can be a very simple practice. Or for some people, the fingertips or the fingers are really helpful. So just something you can start to train yourself in, something that you can start to cultivate a habit of, that's available. And that is not too difficult, not too challenging, and that you can do. And it really can be a game changer, because it doesn't sound like much, but what we're doing here is we're initiating a process-oriented approach, right? We're taking ourselves out of the overwhelm, out of the future tripping, or getting too caught in the past, and we're bringing ourselves into the process of being here and now, with the body, with the breath. Take your choice, right? It can be a lot of different things, or just with the environment around us if it's not too overwhelming. And we're bringing ourselves into a sense of presence. Now, a lot of people here, this is where they think meditation stops. No, this is the base. This is like the foundation. It's not where it stops. It's where it starts. So once we cultivate that foundation a little bit, that foundation of nowness and presence, that's when we can go into richer ways of working with insight, working with different types of understanding through open questions. So for me, open questions, or I could say like a more open and fluid way of how we use our thinking mind, it allows us to enter more of a process orientation with our thoughts, with our reasoning, with our logic-based mind, with how we want to, work with a particular issue, how we want to create, how we want to, work with something we have to get done. So to me, when there's more open questions, when there's not simply this idea of like what I think this should be, or getting stuck in the ideal of what I need to produce, instead I start engaging with a process of that. So for me, some of my early open questions with something are kind of like, what kinds of things do I want to put into motion in this process, right? So there might be step 1, step 2, step 3, and just letting things fall into the next step, right? So we might have the first step, we create that, allow that to create step 2, allow that to create step 3. And this can be a whole new way to work with our life. Now, I'm not saying this is accessible with everything. Sometimes we just have to get something done. I understand that. There might be a deadline, or we have other commitments. And there is something to say around that. And also, we might also have to look at how much busyness we're creating in our life. Are there things we can let go of to slow down and to be able to work more in the way I'm describing, which is working from a place of creation and meeting the moment. The moment means, lots of things. It just means whatever's arising in that moment, our thoughts, our identities, what's outside of us, what's inside of us, meeting all of that. How do we create a practice of that and then learn to enter a process of creation rather than a process of doing? To me, doing is another component of perfectionism, because when I'm doing, I'm trying to become. And when I'm trying to become, it's usually based on an ideal of what I think I should become, right? Rather than letting me engage in that creative process. We're always becoming. I guess we could say from a Buddhist perspective, until we learn how to unbecome, we're kind of stuck becoming. But we might as well work with becoming in a creative, process-oriented way that takes us out of all of the fear modes of perfectionism and trying to be perfect. So I think I'm going to leave it there. The last thing I'm going to say is the word, for those of you who want to go a little bit deeper into studies on Buddhism, or you already are, this word perfect can also be used in a different context. And so sometimes actually we see this word perfect come up in translations of Buddhism. For instance, the perfection of wisdom, right? So there's sutras on the perfection of wisdom. In Sanskrit, they're called prajnaparamita, right? And of course, it's a choice by translators, but perfect isn't necessarily a bad word when we understand its context. So the perfection of wisdom, for instance, is a perfect that's beyond perfect, right? So in Buddhism, we use these words in really interesting dynamic ways. For instance, we have the perfection of wisdom. We also have Dzogpa Chenpo in Tibetan, which can translate as the great perfection, which is a yana of teachings and practices in the Vajrayana traditions. And here also perfection has this connotation of going beyond both what's not perfect and what's perfect. So it's perfect because it goes beyond perfect, right? So I just wanted to end on this note, because I think it's also part of this flavor of becoming more process-oriented and learning to remedy some of our perfection, both in our meditation and kind of just life in general, which is the idea of awakening. right? Because for me, the idea of awakening or Buddhahood, when we're pursuing that through our meditation and study and practice, it's not really about becoming perfect. It's actually about recognizing this perfection beyond perfect or not perfect. And that really inspires me in these kinds of like exploring these new ways to work with myself, these new ways of, not seeking to become an ideal, but rather just working with the grittiness, working with the earthiness of what's here and now. So I'll leave it there. I hope some of this can be helpful to you, both in your meditation practice and life. And as always, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear if this content is helpful or you have any thoughts based on this. Leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes or somewhere else, you can always reach me at scotttusa.com. And yeah, that's about it. Wishing you a great day wherever you are. Thanks so much.